welcome back to the Beer Crate Telecaster build. This is part 2. Part 1, if you haven't watched it yet, shows most of the building of the body. And this episode or part is showing the build of the guitar neck. By the time we finish, I'll be about 90% done, maybe 95% done with the neck build. Here I'm planing a piece of walnut. It's basically quarter sawn. It's about as quarter sawn as I could find. And I'm edging it with my antique number 6. Since I made this video, I've actually located a really nice number 8, which might have been a little bit better. The 6 is sort of a weird size. I think most people really like the 7, but it works fine. As with all truss rods, there's usually sort of a piece that sort of pokes out, where the two rods have been welded together. It's never perfect, so you usually have to adjust the cavity a little bit up where the nut is to make everything fit just right. Just using a couple chisels to get it right. Let me know in the comments if you enjoy the narration. In the past, I've got a lot of comments for people that say they like the narration, and I've also heard people say they like it when it's just the music. I thought I'd narrate this one just for fun. So here I'm just test fitting the truss rod to make sure everything fits right. Using a straight edge to make sure everything's flush below the surface of what would be the top of the neck or where the fretboard will attach. Beautiful piece of walnut. You'll notice there's a little bit of curly grain right there. I don't know if you can see it. And I really had to go out of my way to sort of avoid that because it was causing some issues in terms of straightness of the neck. The neck was perfectly straight otherwise, but that one spot, I couldn't plane out the curliness of it. So I know a lot of people use router tables for this step, and I've received a number of private comments from people saying, hey, why don't you just use a router table? I actually own a router table. They make me a little bit nervous, and this smaller router that I'm using here is pretty easy to keep stable. It's pretty small, so it doesn't rock back and forth on the smaller surfaces that I'm using here. And I just feel it's safer and easier to use. I left a little flange down at the bottom, and then I'll just switch router bits and trim that off. So instead of having the bearing on the top of the bit, now it's at the bottom. So now it's riding along the edge that I previously routed. I always like to drill out the tuner holes before I actually cut the excess wood away from the headstock. If I drill from the back of the neck, if I have any tear out, that tear out will go away once I actually trim the headstock. Sorry for the shaking. Again, I'm just drilling 99% of the way through the headstock. Ideally, what will happen is the sharp center bit or center point of the Forstner bit, I'm not really sure what it's called, I'm almost positive there's probably some sort of technical name for it, but I just want that sharp center locating piece of the Forstner bit to poke through the top of the wood on the other side, and that way I can line it up when I drill through. And actually, to be honest, I don't need to drill all the way through because I'm going to cut off part of the headstock anyways. But I can't help it, so you'll notice I went ahead and drilled through. And here I've glued the fretboard to the neck, just kind of checking it to make sure that I had good squeeze out all the way around. And of course, although I'm going to use a router to trim off the excess and make sure the fretboard is flush with the neck, you really don't want to use the router to cut off big chunks of wood, so try to remove as much as possible. That both saves the router bit and it's a bit more safe. You're going to get less sort of checking or kickback from the router. This is a bit tricky because I've already rounded or radiused the fretboard. But in honesty, I just really want to get it close. I'm going to go back with a leveling beam anyways to make sure that the surfaces are perfectly flush. Here I'm just marking where I'm going to cut away the waste material so that I can thickness the headstock. If there's one thing I would suggest to new guitar builders, and I'm sure that some of them are watching, and I'm admittedly still new, even though I've been doing this for maybe 3 or 4 years now, I still consider myself new and learning. But one thing that I would suggest is go ahead, if you're going to invest in anything, invest in a nice router and invest in a nice bandsaw. It makes all the world of difference. And maybe some hand planes. Trying to be really careful here not to cut too deep. I want to trim off this waste, but I don't want to cut too deep into the part that will actually remain. I don't want a line, basically. If anybody was ever wondering why Leo Fender is a genius, this should demonstrate it right here. As complicated as it is to make a Gibson or PRS style headstock that is angled back, this is really straightforward. I've taken a piece of wood that's essentially a little bit thinner than an inch thick, and I've trimmed off a little bit, and now I'm using the radius on a belt sander. I have to think that this is how Fender does theirs to some extent, probably with bigger tools or more refined tools, but really, really straightforward and simple. Here I'm just sort of mocking it up to see what it's going to look like. I'm pretty happy with that. Again, if you haven't watched it yet, part 1 will show the building of that body. I try my best to get a good angle here. Of course, my big hand is always in the way. And I've never thought my hands were actually particularly big, but for some reason they look gigantic. Obviously, it's the zoom. Drilling in some holes for side dots. I did something new here that I haven't done in the past. Usually I use pearl or abalone, or abalone, however you want to pronounce it, side dots. And I've always wanted to try this approach where you use these plastic strips. You'll see in a second. It's plastic longer pieces that you just sort of insert, glue, and cut off. It's way easier, and I think it's appropriate for this guitar to not be as fancy. I always like to go back and flood all of the holes with really thin super glue. I do this for the fretboard inlays as well. Use a leveling beam to just sort of level everything out. Here's a 10-inch radius beam. I've already radiused the fretboard, but since I've inlaid the pearl fret dots, I'm just going in to re-level everything one more time and make sure everything is correct. I'm just roughing out the profile. This is just refining the profile. The idea here is that I want to get the profile pretty close to exact, or as close to exact as is possible, so that when I start carving the shape of the neck, I know that the thickness is correct. I don't have to really worry about that. Here I'm just roughing in the volute, sort of the place where the headstock meets the neck. I'm not trying to be particularly precise at this point. So here's my diagram that I use. I got this neck profile or shape off of my 1995 Fender Stratocaster, and it's maybe a little thinner than a typical Telecaster neck, but it's my favorite shape, neck shape, and so when I build Fender style guitars, this is the neck shape that I actually replicate or try to replicate. It's never exactly the same. So what you can see is I've transferred those lines over to the neck, and the idea is that I'm creating a facet. If I can keep the rasp, in this case a Shinto rasp, in between the first line that would be on top of the neck and basically the edge of the fretboard and the neck where those 2 points meet, if I can keep the rasp at an angle between those two lines, I can carve away all that material and it will create a nice facet. As you can see, I've faceted the first part, and it's not perfect. I'll perfect it later as I start to get closer and closer to the final shape of the neck. So now I'm looking for the next facet. And you can see I've drawn the next set of lines, and now I'm going to just keep the rasp in between the two lines for this next facet. I have to say that carving the neck used to be the scariest part about guitar building, but now it's absolutely my favorite. So you can see now I have two facets cut into the neck, and it's starting to sort of look like a neck. And here I've cut in the third on one side, just up to that center point. And one of the keys here is to make sure that you never cut into that center line. As long as that center line is still there and you've shaped the depth of the neck at the beginning correctly, then you don't have to worry about the necks being too thick or too thin. Now I'm contradicting myself a little bit because now I'm going over that center line, but I'm really taking a very, very light pass. It looks like I'm taking off more than I actually am. I'm really just rounding it. And then I like to use these round card scrapers to really sort of connect all the dots, because once you create facets, you're going to have sharp edges. So I like to use these card scrapers to sort of take care of that. And the nice thing about using the round one is that I'm not introducing any new straight lines into the neck. I also like to use sandpaper to refine the shape. I'm not actually sanding it for smoothness here, and I'm really far off at this point from getting the neck close to the right shape, but I'm just trying to see where I'm at. And sometimes it's kind of hard to tell, particularly when you have the grain going in one direction and you have various lines. It can be a little bit misleading to the eye. It looks like you have curves that you don't actually have. So here it is, really close. So anytime that you cut wood, particularly take a big chunk out of it, it can always move a bit. So now that I've done all the sculpting or carving, I'm checking it to make sure that the neck is still straight, and it's not. And there's a tiny bit of a bump or high spot in the middle. So now I've turned my radius beam upside down, and I'm just using it to straighten the neck a little bit better. Get it perfect. There are things that I really enjoy doing in guitar building, such as carving the neck and taking a piece of wood and turning it into something. And there's things that I don't really enjoy, like fretwork. This is a handy little tool that'll allow you to make sure that the fret slots are deep enough. I've made the mistake before of not cutting the slots deep enough, and then the frets don't seat right. And then you have to take the fret out to cut the slot deeper. Ends up tearing the fretboard a little bit. It's just something you want to avoid if you can. Sorry for the shaking. Not really sure why I decided to go ahead and include so much shaking video, but there it is. After I've seated them with a hammer, I always like to go back with my drill press and fret seating arbor, or whatever you want to call these things. I forgot what the name is. Just to make sure that they're really down in the grooves, or the fret slots. Everything is seated correctly. Now you just got to nip off the ends. Actually, have to be pretty careful at this stage because these frets get really sharp. And I have cut myself a number of times. It's also important to wear eye protection. These fret ends, when you cut them off, when you nip them off, usually they'll just fall straight down, but sometimes they will shoot off and fly at your face. So. I'm not doing a final fret dressing here. I'm really just taking off the edge so it's not so sharp when I work with it. Angling the ends of the frets. After everything is done, I'll have to go back and clearly ease the ends of the frets, round everything over so it's not sharp and it's comfortable to play. Inevitably, if you don't nip the ends of the fret tangs, you're going to have small slots in some of these frets. You can see a gap between the bottom of the fret and a little hole in the fretboard. So I always like to go back and fill those with rosewood dust and a little bit of super glue. I think it just looks nicer. And here comes some more shaking. I'm just stamping in my initials and the quote-unquote serial number. I think this is number 8. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I already have a bunch of videos that I've recorded of more build on the body, so hopefully I'll post that soon. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I'm getting close to 1,000 subscribers and it'll allow me to monetize things. Maybe I'll do more videos.